I found my husband in a heated video call with his lover. She's a pathetic and ridiculous fat woman, but it's in my best interest to stay with her, he said. I just smiled because, the idiot, he never imagined that my revenge for all his humiliations had already started the day he met his mistress. Mariana carefully closed the front door, carrying the groceries she had bought, planning to surprise Carlos with a special dinner. There was something in the air, something that made her skin crawl. From down the hallway, from his study on the second floor, she could hear her husband's voice, but he wasn't alone. There were laughs, low voices, nervous giggles that weren't even trying to hide. She slowly climbed the stairs, each step a heartbeat in her ears. From the shadowy hallway, she could see the slightly open door to the study. Carlos was sitting in front of his computer, his face showing an enthusiasm Mariana hadn't seen in years. On the screen, a young, attractive woman played with her hair, throwing flirtatious glances as she laughed at something he had said. "Love, today is our anniversary. Where are we going?" the woman on the screen asked sweetly. Carlos leaned back in his chair and let out a loud laugh. "Of course, Claudia. You and I have so much to celebrate, my love. This will be unforgettable, unlike what I have at home." His tone turned sour as he noticed Mariana's figure in the doorway. Without hiding his contempt, he glared at her. "What are you doing there, you disgusting fat slob? Can't you see I'm busy with a 100% beautiful woman?" He spat, his face twisted in disgust. Mariana felt the air become dense, heavy, but said nothing. She kept her gaze fixed on him, as if she were looking at something far away, something beyond that moment. Carlos stood abruptly, crossed the room, and grabbed her arm roughly. "Come here," he ordered, dragging her toward the screen as if wanting Claudia to enjoy the spectacle. "Look at this," he said with a cruel smile, pointing at the screen. "This is Claudia, see her? Beautiful, elegant, young. She'll give me children, not like you. You're a useless fat slob. You can't even move in bed. That's why you don't get pregnant." The impact of his words hit Mariana like an invisible blow, but she didn't let him notice. On the outside, her face remained expressionless, but inside, something began to crack, or perhaps it was being built. Carlos released her with a slight shove and returned to his computer, as if the entire episode was just a fleeting annoyance. "Go. Get out of here. I don't want to see you snooping when I talk to Claudia, the future mother of my children. Get out of my sight." Mariana took a step back, then another, until her figure disappeared from the room. Carlos turned his attention back to Claudia, completely ignoring his wife's presence in the house. She descended the stairs calmly, her hands clenched into fists that trembled slightly. She left the bags in the kitchen with a mechanical movement and headed to the bathroom. Alone in that small space, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. There were no tears, no screams, just a silence that filled every corner of her being. In that silence, Mariana made a decision. Her mind was no longer a whirlwind of uncontrolled emotions. It was an orderly, cold, and calculating space. Her calmness was her best weapon. Carlos didn't know it, but he had just sparked a fire that would consume him. She wasn't weak. Not anymore. That night, while Carlos laughed in his study, planning his perfect future with Claudia, Mariana mentally began to write the first chapter of her plan. She wouldn't just confront him, she would dismantle him piece by piece until there was nothing left. And she would do it with a smile. The tension in the air was as palpable as the echoes of laughter coming from the upper floor. And in that instant, Mariana understood that pain was not her enemy, but her ally. The next day, Mariana woke up early, long before the sun began to rise. The house was steeped in a silence that seemed as fragile as the facade of her marriage. While she prepared coffee, she heard Carlos coming down the stairs. He was barefoot, but his presence was as heavy as a door slamming. Without looking at her, he went straight to the refrigerator, opened the door roughly, and pulled out a bottle of water. Mariana watched him from the kitchen silently. Carlos had always believed silence meant submission, but today, she was using it as a weapon. "I hope you don't think that by staying quiet you're doing something," Carlos said without turning, as if he could feel her gaze on him. "Because you know it, You don't matter. You're only here because I don't have time to deal with changes right now. Mariana took a sip of her coffee and set the cup on the table with a slow, deliberate movement. Changes, she asked, without raising her voice. Carlos turned toward her, surprised by the calmness in her tone. There was no trace of pleading or anger, just curiosity. Yes, changes, he replied, hardening his posture. This marriage is a facade I maintain because it's convenient for me. So don't get any ideas that this means anything. I have my own plans, and you? Well, you keep being what you've always been, a decorative nuisance. Mariana held his gaze. I understand, she said, offering no further explanation. Carlos furrowed his brow, as if looking for something more in her words, but Mariana turned around and began washing the cup, as if the conversation had never happened. When Carlos left for work, Mariana grabbed her laptop and sat at the dining table. Her search started with something simple: how to open a bank account without your partner knowing. After reading several articles, she decided the first thing she needed was information. She reviewed their shared accounts, credit cards, and bank statements. She discovered something that made her stop for a moment. Carlos had been making recurring transfers to an unknown account. The description said personal expenses, but the amounts were high, far too high to be everyday expenses. So this is how you do it, she murmured to herself. A plan began to form in her mind, a strategy that promised to tear Carlos apart from the inside. But first, she needed allies. Mariana knew confronting him directly wasn't an option, at least not yet. Cunning was her only advantage. That evening, when Carlos returned, he was in a good mood, something rare for him. Mariana was in the living room, reading a book. Carlos flopped onto the sofa in front of her and turned on the TV, completely ignoring her. I'm not going to be here for dinner tomorrow, he announced, not looking at her, as if she didn't deserve an explanation. Mariana looked up from her book and regarded him with a serene expression. Anything important? She asked, pretending to care. I'm going out with Claudia, he replied shamelessly, as if he wanted to provoke her. Mariana felt an inexplicable chill run through her body, but she didn't let it show. It's her birthday. I thought I'd take her to that fancy restaurant downtown, the one you always wanted to try, he added, delivering the final blow. How thoughtful of you, Mariana said, returning to her book. Carlos scoffed, frustrated by her lack of reaction, and focused on the TV show. That night, while Carlos slept, Mariana opened her computer again. She needed something more than just information. She decided to look for a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who understood exactly what she was facing. She found a firm specializing in high-conflict divorces, and one of the profiles caught her eye: Elena Perez, a retired attorney who offered consultations to women in emotionally abusive situations. The call was brief but intense. Elena didn't ask unnecessary questions. Her voice carried a mixture of compassion and firmness. The first thing you need is financial security. Can you reroute funds to a separate account without him noticing? She asked. I've already started doing that, Mariana replied. Good. Now you need proof. Anything that can incriminate him. Messages, emails, photos. Whatever shows infidelity or abuse. Do you have anything? Elena continued. I have everything, Mariana said with a conviction that surprised herself. Then you're closer than you think. Just remember, he must not suspect anything until you're ready to act, Elena concluded before hanging up. Mariana closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house felt denser than ever. In that solitude, a controversial thought crossed her mind. Would it be enough to take him down legally? Or did he deserve more? Something that would leave a permanent mark, a lesson he would never forget? As the clock struck midnight, Mariana smiled for the first time in a long while. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but one of certainty. Carlos thought she was weak, a disposable ornament in his life. But soon, he would discover how wrong he was. Mariana woke up early, her thoughts as methodical as the plan she had begun to devise. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be perfectly calculated. That day, Carlos had shamelessly announced he wouldn't be home at night, a gift wrapped for someone like Mariana, who now saw opportunities where before there had only been pain. While he was getting ready in front of the mirror, Mariana watched from the bathroom door. Carlos wore a shirt she had bought him for a past anniversary, as if trying to highlight the irony of his disdain. He checked his reflection with satisfaction, ignoring his wife's presence. "Don't wait up for me," Carlos said, his tone dripping with contempt as he adjusted his watch. "Is it a work meeting?" Mariana asked, with a calmness that almost seemed like indifference. Carlos let out a dry laugh and looked at her through the mirror, not bothering to turn around. "What do you think?" "It's Claudia, I told you yesterday. Don't tell me you're losing your memory. Today's her birthday, and I'm going to make sure it's an unforgettable day for her. Not like those mediocre anniversaries you used to organize." Mariana didn't respond, but her hands trembled slightly before she tucked them into her pockets. She watched Carlos leave the room, but not before delivering one last blow. "Oh, and don't even think about calling me. I need peace, not your whining." The front door slammed shut, and the sound seemed to seal a pact. Mariana took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to let herself be consumed by hatred, at least not now. Everything had to stay under control. She waited 15 minutes, then grabbed her purse. She had planned this moment since the night before. She went down to the garage and got into her car, making sure to keep a safe distance as she followed Carlos through the city streets. Each red light was a pause to reflect on how she had arrived at this point. Each unexpected turn was a reminder of how little she truly knew the man who once promised to love her. Carlos pulled up to an exclusive restaurant downtown. Mariana parked on a nearby street, careful not to lose sight of him as he got out of the car. She saw him open the door with a practiced attitude, his perfect smile, his confident posture. At the back table, Claudia was already waiting. She wore a red dress that left nothing to the imagination. The way they looked at each other made Mariana's stomach turn, but she didn't allow herself to falter. She took out her phone and started recording. Her hands shook at first, but soon she found her stability. Carlos handed Claudia a gift, a small box she opened with enthusiasm. It was a diamond necklace. Mariana couldn't hear the conversation from her position at the nearby bar where she had managed to sit, but she could read their lips enough to make out a few words. "It's perfect, my love." "You're so generous," Claudia said, leaning in to kiss Carlos. Mariana couldn't help but remember how Carlos had denied her money for medical treatments when they tried to have children. "We don't need any more unnecessary expenses," he had said back then. Now, in front of her, she saw how he splurged on another woman. The tension in her chest turned into ironclad determination. She kept recording while the couple toasted. Carlos' smile was that of a man who believed himself untouchable. But Mariana knew something he didn't. His empire was about to crumble. She decided to take a bigger risk. She left the bar and headed to the restroom, which happened to be near the table where Carlos and Claudia were sitting. She walked past them with her head down, but just enough to catch a snippet of their conversation. "I don't know how much longer I can stand that woman," Carlos was saying, clearly referring to Mariana. His tone was casual, as though he were talking about a broken object he planned to discard. "Why don't you just divorce her already?" Claudia asked impatiently. Mariana, hidden behind a pillar, held her breath. "Because I don't want to lose a single penny," Carlos replied, his voice cold and calculating. Then he took Claudia's hand and kissed it. "But soon everything will be ready, and you'll be the only one in my life." Mariana clenched her fists. In that moment, she knew she wasn't just facing an unfaithful man, but someone who had planned to reduce her to nothing. Her plan was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival. She went back to her car and allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of repressed anger, a desperate need for justice. She started the engine and left the place with one certainty: this would be the last time Carlos humiliated her. When she got home, she reviewed the footage she had recorded. Each image, each word, was another piece to the puzzle she was carefully constructing. That night, Mariana made a list of everything she would need to destroy Carlos, not just legal evidence, but allies. People who could help ensure that his downfall would be final. The woman who had entered that restaurant like a shadow was now a storm in the making. Carlos didn't know it, but he had unleashed something he wouldn't be able to stop. The real battle was about to begin, and Mariana wasn't planning to lose. The next day, Mariana spent the morning in front of the bathroom mirror, contemplating her reflection as though searching for answers. She knew Carlos wouldn't be long in returning, and for what she was about to do, she needed to remain in control. Every word, every gesture had to be perfect. The plan wasn't just about gathering evidence. It also required playing the role of the naive and submissive wife, the one Carlos took for granted. When she heard Carlos' car pull into the driveway, she prepared herself. She walked down the stairs slowly, making sure her expression gave nothing away. She found him in the living room, checking his phone as he placed the keys on the table. His shirt was unbuttoned, and it carried the scent of a perfume that was clearly not hers. Mariana fought back the disgust she felt and gave him a light smile. "Carlos," she said, softening her voice so as not to raise suspicion. "I was thinking, this year I haven't planned anything for my birthday, but my friends decided to throw me a party. I thought we could go together. It would be nice to share something, don't you think?" Carlos looked up from his phone, raising an eyebrow as if Mariana's words were some kind of joke. His eyes ran up and down her figure, and his sneer appeared almost immediately. "Do you really think I'm going to go out with you?" Carlos asked, not even bothering to hide the mocking tone in his voice. Mariana felt her chest tighten, but she stayed calm. Carlos stood up and walked toward her, gesturing as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Look at yourself, Mariana. Have you seen yourself in a mirror?" he said, stopping in front of her with a cruel smile. "You're a mess. Fat, careless. Do you think anyone wants to be seen with you in public? It would be like going out with a beached whale. Honestly, you embarrass me. I don't even know how you can walk outside without feeling ridiculous." Each word was like a knife piercing her inside, but Mariana didn't look away. It was as if her body had learned to absorb the pain, transforming it into something deeper, sharper. She let him continue, knowing that each insult wasn't just an offense, but a confirmation of who the man she was sharing her home with truly was. Carlos returned to the couch and picked up his phone, as if the conversation had ended. Mariana stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. Finally, she broke the silence. "I understand," she said calmly, surprising him. Carlos briefly looked up, but, seeing no trace of confrontation in her, ignored her again. "Perfect. Then do me a favor and don't bother me with nonsense like this again." "I have more important things to do," Carlos responded, sending a message. Mariana left the room and went upstairs. When she reached her bedroom, she closed the door and let her breath quicken. Carlos' words echoed in her mind, but not as a lament. They were like a mantra that reinforced her determination. She had played her role perfectly, and Carlos, blinded by his arrogance, hadn't seen what was brewing. Later, while Carlos spoke on the phone in his study, Mariana checked the calendar on her computer. She knew she had a meeting with her friends scheduled for that day, but what Carlos didn't know was that it wouldn't be just any meeting. Lucia, her closest friend, had arranged a gathering with other women who had gone through similar situations. Among them was Elena, the retired lawyer Mariana had contacted a few days before. When she arrived at the cafe where they were meeting, Mariana noticed Lucia was already waiting. Her friend's gaze was one of concern, but also support. "Are you sure about this?" Lucia asked as they sat down. Mariana nodded firmly. "This isn't just about what he's done to me. It's about what he keeps doing, and what he could keep doing if I don't do something," she replied. Lucia nodded, though the sadness in her eyes was evident. The meeting was more productive than Mariana had imagined. Elena provided her with a detailed list of documents she needed to gather, including account statements, incriminating messages, and any evidence of verbal abuse. But what mattered most was what Elena said before they parted. "Carlos underestimates and manipulates you. He thinks he has control because he's convinced you'll never take action. Use that to your advantage. But don't forget, men like him don't stop. If he suspects anything, he could become dangerous." Mariana returned home with a mix of emotions. She was strengthened by the support of the women she had met, but also aware that time was running out. Each passing day was another opportunity for Carlos to find out what she was planning. That night, while he slept, Mariana reviewed the messages she had recorded in the restaurant. Every insult, every degrading word, was another piece of the puzzle that would soon be complete. The next day, Carlos didn't even mention the birthday party conversation. He acted as if Mariana didn't exist, which, paradoxically, gave her the freedom she needed to continue with her plan. He thought he had defeated her, but Mariana knew that the real game had only just begun. The next day, Mariana sat at the dining table, her gaze fixed on a book she wasn't really reading. She heard Carlos' footsteps as he moved up and down the stairs, as if restless. It was rare to see him like this. Normally, when he was home, he'd lock himself in his study or stay in front of the TV, ignoring her completely. But today, something was different. He seemed nervous, distracted, as if searching for something he couldn't find. She closed the book and stood up calmly, heading to the kitchen. From there, she could hear Carlos speaking softly on the phone, but she couldn't make out the exact words. She forced herself to keep a serene expression while she prepared some tea, even though inside she felt something was changing in the balance of the game she had been building. When Carlos finished his call, he appeared in the kitchen, watching her with a calculating look. Mariana pretended not to notice and continued stirring the sugar in her cup. "What are you doing?" Carlos asked, crossing his arms. "Making tea," she replied, not turning around. Her voice was calm, almost bored. Carlos stood in silence for a moment, but his presence filled the room like a shadow. "I've noticed you've been different lately," he said finally. Mariana slowly turned, holding the cup in her hands. "Different? How so?" she asked, feigning innocence. Carlos took a step toward her, his gaze scrutinizing her as if he were trying to read beyond her words. "I don't know. You just seem calmer, quieter, like you're plotting something," he said with a mocking smile. Mariana allowed herself a small laugh. "Carlos, what could I possibly be plotting?" she responded, making a theatrical gesture of disbelief. She walked toward the table and sat down, taking a sip of her tea. He stayed where he was, watching her with narrowed eyes. "I don't know, but I know you, Mariana. You're so predictable that when you change even a little, it's impossible not to notice." Mariana set the cup on the table and looked him directly in the eyes. There was a flash of defiance in her gaze, but she softened it with an almost shy smile. "Carlos, I'm not plotting anything. If I've been calmer, it's because I'm trying to accept everything, accept how things are between us." Carlos raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her response. Mariana stood up slowly, as if she wanted to show that she had nothing to hide. She took a few steps toward him, reducing the distance between them. "I want you to know that, despite everything, I'm still your wife. And even though I know you have Claudia, I still love you, Carlos. I can't help it. That's why I want to ask you not to leave her." Carlos stood still, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief and then to uncontrolled laughter. "Are you crazy?" he exclaimed, bringing a hand to his face as he continued laughing. "What the hell are you telling me?" Mariana looked at him with a mix of vulnerability and determination. Every word she said was measured, every gesture was part of the act. "I just want you to be happy," she said, her voice trembling. "And if Claudia makes you happy, I don't want to get in the way. But I also want you to remember that I'm still here. I'm your wife. Maybe I can give you what you're looking for." Carlos stopped laughing and looked at her with an expression that hovered between disdain and amusement. He took a step toward her, leaning in just enough so their faces were at the same level. "Do you really hear yourself? You're pathetic, Mariana. A pathetic, desperate fat woman. You have no idea how ridiculous you look right now." Mariana lowered her gaze, letting the tears fill her eyes, but not allowing them to fall. It was crucial that she appeared affected, but not broken. "I don't care if you think that about me," she replied, her voice trembling. "I just want you to know that, despite everything, I'm still the same woman who loved you from the beginning." Carlos let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "The same woman? No, Mariana. What you are is a piñata. A ball full of crap. And the worst part is that you still think you can compete with Claudia. Claudia. A woman who's not only beautiful, but also gives me what you could never give me. Hell, even in bed, you're a disaster. If you were a little more like her, maybe I wouldn't be looking for what I need somewhere else. Mariana clenched her fists, hiding them behind her back so he wouldn't notice. Each word was like a blow, but she knew she had to resist. This moment, this exchange, was necessary for what was to come. You're right, Carlos, she finally said, raising her gaze to meet his. I can't compete with Claudia. But that doesn't mean I don't want to try. Carlos looked at her, his stare intense, as if trying to figure out whether she was serious or if it was all a joke. Then he shook his head and left the kitchen without saying anything else. Mariana watched him go, allowing herself a sigh when she heard the door to his study close. The calm on her face vanished the moment she was alone. She placed both hands on the table, leaning forward as she tried to regain control. Her whole body trembled, but not from fear. It was rage. A rage she had learned to tame and transform into a tool. She knew Carlos was starting to suspect, but she also knew that his own prejudices and arrogance blinded him. He believed she was weak, pathetic, incapable of anything beyond submission. And that was exactly what she needed him to believe. That night, while Carlos spoke on the phone in his study, Mariana locked herself in the bathroom with her laptop. She reviewed the messages from Claudia that she had intercepted and noticed something interesting. Claudia had been pressuring Carlos to divorce. She had repeatedly mentioned that she didn't want to continue being the other woman. This was new. Until now, Mariana had assumed Claudia was content with her role. But no, Claudia wanted more, and that meant Carlos was under pressure. Mariana smiled to herself as she closed the laptop. She had planted doubt in Carlos, and while that made him more dangerous, it also made him more vulnerable. Now, she had to move with even more caution than ever. Time was running out, and every step she took had to be precise, calculated. She couldn't afford any mistakes, because she knew Carlos wouldn't hesitate to crush her if he found out what she was planning. That night, while lying next to him and pretending to sleep, Mariana thought about the words he had said to her. Don't leave Claudia. It was ironic, because once she ended things with him, Claudia wouldn't want to stay either. Carlos didn't know it, but he was already trapped. His arrogance and contempt had blinded him, and that would be his downfall. The atmosphere in the house was tense, as if a storm were about to break at any moment. Carlos had been more alert, more meticulous with his words and actions, as if he suspected that something was moving beyond his control. Mariana noticed it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, in the seemingly casual questions he threw into their conversations, trying, unsuccessfully, to get some answer that would reassure him. Mariana was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Her movements were calculated, precise, just like everything she had done in the past few days. She heard Carlos enter, and the sound of his footsteps stopped right at the kitchen threshold. She didn't need to turn around to know he was watching her. What are you thinking about? He asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Mariana didn't stop her task. She simply shrugged slightly, keeping her tone casual. Nothing special. Just planning dinner. Carlos leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. His gaze pierced her, searching for any sign that she was hiding something. Mariana felt it but didn't flinch. I've been noticing. You seem different, he insisted, as if trying to provoke her. More calm, more sure of yourself. That's not normal for you. Mariana set the knife down on the cutting board and finally turned to face him. Her face was serene, but there was a glint in her eyes that Carlos couldn't decipher. Carlos, are you really surprised that I'm calm? She asked, tilting her head slightly. After everything you've said to me, after everything you've done, what do you expect? Should I keep crying? I think I've given you enough of that. Carlos let out a bitter laugh, although there was some discomfort in his expression. I don't believe you. You're not as strong as you pretend to be. Not after what you've become, after what you are. Mariana held his gaze, letting the silence speak for her. Finally, Carlos shook his head, frustrated, and left the kitchen. Mariana waited until she heard the door to his study close before letting out a sigh. She knew she was playing with fire. Every word she spoke, every gesture, was proof that she could maintain control. But she was also aware that Carlos was becoming more unpredictable. Her instincts told her that time was running out, and she needed to accelerate her plan. That night, while Carlos slept, Mariana took out her laptop and reviewed the file she had been meticulously building. It was a digital dossier with everything she needed to destroy him: messages, suspicious bank transfers, photos of Carlos with Claudia in public. But there was something else that concerned her. As she reviewed the intercepted messages between Carlos and Claudia, she found something that made her stop. Claudia had mentioned several times the possibility of moving in together, but Carlos had responded with evasions. This wasn't new. What caught Mariana's attention was a recent message. "If we don't do this soon, I'm not waiting anymore. There's another man interested in me, and I'm not going to waste any more time." Mariana smiled to herself. Claudia, just like Carlos, was playing her own game. But this opened a door that she hadn't considered before. If Claudia became a threat to Carlos, she could use that to her advantage. The next morning, Mariana decided to take the next step. She knew she had to stay close to Carlos to keep misdirecting him, but she also needed to be a step ahead. When she saw him coming down the stairs, already dressed to leave, she greeted him with a smile that she knew would throw him off. "Carlos, will you stay for dinner tonight?" she asked as she set 2 cups of coffee on the table. He stopped, eyeing her suspiciously. "Why are you asking?" Mariana pretended to be busy arranging the table. "I just thought we could have dinner together. It's been a while since we've had a quiet night." Carlos let out a dry laugh. "I'm not in the mood for your desperate attempts at playing the perfect wife." Mariana kept her calm, though inside she wrestled between disdain and satisfaction that he still underestimated her. "I understand," she replied, allowing a hint of sadness to seep into her voice. "But if you change your mind, I'll be here." Carlos didn't say anything else. He grabbed his briefcase and left the house. Mariana watched him from the window, waiting until his car disappeared down the street before she picked up her phone. She dialed the number saved under the name Luz, though she knew it wasn't just any friend. It was Elena, the lawyer who had been helping her plan every move. "I found something interesting," Mariana said as soon as Elena answered. "Claudia is pressuring Carlos to make decisions, and I think this could work to my advantage." "That's good," Elena responded, her voice professional but understanding. "But you need to be careful. If he feels like he's losing control, he might become aggressive." "I know. I'm ready for whatever comes." That afternoon, Mariana decided to leave the house and head to the restaurant where Carlos usually met Claudia. She had found out they had a table reserved for that night. Her plan was simple but risky: to show up unexpectedly and closely observe their dynamic. She knew it was dangerous, but she also knew she needed more evidence for the next step. When she arrived at the restaurant, she sat at a discreet table near the window. She wore a hat and dark sunglasses, trying to blend in. It didn't take long. Carlos arrived first, and soon after, Claudia appeared, wearing a dress that made her intentions clear. Mariana watched them, discreetly recording with her phone while they talked. The tension between them was palpable. Claudia spoke quickly, her gestures nervous. Carlos, on the other hand, seemed uncomfortable, as if he didn't want to be there. "I can't keep waiting, Carlos," Claudia said at one point, her voice loud enough for Mariana to hear. "If you're not going to leave your wife, tell me now. I don't want to keep being the other woman." Carlos leaned in towards her, lowering his voice, but Mariana managed to catch some words. "I can't do it right now. Things are complicated. I need time." Claudia crossed her arms, frustrated. "You always need time. I'm tired of your excuses." Mariana smiled to herself. She knew that tension was her best ally. When Carlos and Claudia left the restaurant, Mariana stayed for a few more minutes, reviewing the images and audio she had captured. Each piece of the puzzle fit, but the final move was still needed. That night, when she returned home, Carlos was already there, sitting on the couch with the TV on. Mariana passed by him, pretending to be tired. "Did you have a good day?" Carlos asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "Normal, as always," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Carlos didn't press further, and Mariana went upstairs to her room. She sat in front of her computer and began organizing everything she had. She knew the time to confront him was near. But she also knew that, before that happened, she had to make sure Carlos had no escape. He believed he was in control, but he was about to find out how wrong he was. Mariana set the table with obsessive attention to every detail. She chose the most elegant dinnerware they had, the same set they almost never used because Carlos said it was too good for ordinary occasions. She lit some candles and poured the wine he usually enjoyed. Everything was calculated to create a sense of normality, even intimacy, something that hadn't existed between them for years. Carlos arrived late, as usual. When he entered the house, his jacket was unbuttoned, and he had his phone in his hand. He didn't even glance at the meticulously set table. Mariana greeted him with a smile, forcing herself not to show the weight of the tension inside. "I waited for you to have dinner," she said, trying to sound warm. Carlos looked up and stared at her as if evaluating whether it was worth staying. After a moment, he set his briefcase by the door and headed for the dining room. "I hope this isn't another one of your attempts to fix things," he said with a tone full of sarcasm as he sat down in the main chair. Mariana served the plates and placed a gift box in the center of the table. Carlos noticed the shiny wrapping and frowned. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the box with disdain. "It's a gift for you," Mariana replied, sitting across from him. Her voice was soft, but there was a glint in her eyes that Carlos couldn't identify. He opened the box with a mix of curiosity and contempt. Inside, he found 2 plane tickets to Cancun and, just underneath, a large-sized bikini, carefully folded. Upon seeing it, Carlos let out a laugh, leaning back in his chair as if he had just heard the funniest joke of his life. "What is this?" he asked between laughs, holding the bikini with both hands. "Are you telling me you're going to wear this?" "Please, Mariana, tell me you're not serious." Mariana held his gaze, keeping calm despite the heat rising to her face. "Yes, I bought it for myself. I thought we could go to Cancun together. Relax, spend time as a couple." Carlos dropped the bikini onto the table and leaned toward her, resting his elbows with a mocking gesture. "As a couple?" "Mariana, there is no couple here. I don't know what you've imagined, but this is ridiculous. Do you really think you're going to wear this and I'm going to want to be with you? Look at yourself. You're huge. That bikini looks like a circus tent." I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Mariana felt Carlos's words like blows, but she didn't let it show on her face. She took a deep breath and responded in a calm voice. "What matters isn't the outside, Carlos, but the inside." Carlos laughed again, this time more forcefully. It was a cruel sound, empty of any emotion other than contempt. "Inside? Please, Mariana. The only thing that matters here is that you have nothing to offer. Neither on the outside nor on the inside. You know what? I'd be doing you a favor if I signed you up for a gym. Do Zumba, Pilates, whatever. Maybe, just maybe, you'll find someone who might love you. Because I can't. I don't love you, Mariana. You're like a piñata. Empty inside and filled with, you know." The last word hung in the air like a dagger. Mariana felt her hands trembling under the table, but she clenched them tightly. She couldn't afford to lose control. Each insult, each humiliation, was another piece of the puzzle she was building. She had learned to turn pain into a weapon, and Carlos, unknowingly, was handing it to her. "I understand how you feel, Carlos," she finally said, staring at her intertwined fingers on the table. "But I want you to know that, despite everything, I still believe in us." Carlos scoffed and pushed the gift box aside like it was trash. "Well, stop believing because there is no us. There's me and there's you. And let me be clear, I don't want anything with you. I'm here because it's convenient, nothing more. If it weren't for how complicated it would be to get rid of you, I would have already done it." Mariana held his gaze, but said nothing. In her silence, there was a strength that Carlos didn't understand, something that made him uneasy even though he wouldn't admit it. He stood up from the table and walked to the living room, leaving her alone in front of the remnants of their dinner. When she was sure Carlos was busy checking his phone, Mariana picked up the bikini and the tickets. She went to her room and placed them in the closet, but not as a reminder of the humiliation. They were more evidence, proof of who Carlos really was. That night, while he slept, Mariana reviewed the recordings from her hidden camera. She had installed a small device in the dining room that captured everything that happened there. Every insult, every gesture of contempt was documented. As she watched the video, a mix of sadness and determination filled her chest. She knew the end was near, but also knew she had to hold out a little longer. Every step she took brought her closer to victory. The next morning, Carlos acted as if nothing had happened. Mariana watched him as he put on his tie in front of the mirror, thinking about how blind he was. He thought he had broken her, that there was nothing left of the woman who once loved him. But what Carlos didn't know was that the same woman had been reborn, stronger, and more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Carlos's routine was predictable, and Mariana knew it. He left the house in the mornings, returned in the evenings, and in between, lived a life that he had carefully kept hidden, or at least that's what he thought. Mariana had spent weeks observing, gathering every movement, every slip-up, and now she had a plan as solid as a wall made of real bricks. But time was starting to play against her. Carlos was more alert, more cautious, as if he sensed something was off. That morning, Carlos left early as usual. Mariana waited until the sound of his car engine completely faded before getting started. She headed to her room and opened the drawer where she kept her laptop and a folder full of documents. She reviewed each file with meticulous attention. She had everything she needed to destroy Carlos's life: financial records showing embezzlement from their joint accounts, photographs with Claudia, and, most importantly, audios where he admitted he didn't want a divorce because it would cost him too much. Mariana took her phone and dialed Elena's number. The lawyer answered almost immediately. "How's everything going?" Elena asked, her usual tone of professionalism mixed with empathy. "I have almost everything ready, but there's something that worries me," Mariana responded, trying to control the anxiety that was starting to seep into her voice. "Carlos has been suspecting. I can tell by the way he looks at me, the questions he asks. I need to make sure he can't counterattack." Elena paused before responding. "The moment you confront Carlos will be crucial. If he feels like he's losing control, he might react unpredictably. Do you have a safe place to go if things get complicated?" "Yes, I've already made the necessary arrangements. But I want everything to be perfect before taking the final step." Elena nodded, though Mariana couldn't see her. There was something reassuring about her silence. "I trust you, Mariana. You're doing everything right. Just remember, don't give him any signs that you're prepared. Stay calm, even if he provokes you." Mariana hung up the call and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm the rhythm of her breathing. She knew Elena was right. Carlos couldn't suspect that her world was about to collapse. Later, Mariana decided to go to Carlos's office. It wasn't something she usually did, but this time, she had a clear purpose. She wanted to confront him indirectly, observe how he would react. When she arrived, the receptionist looked at her in surprise. "Mrs. Mariana, how can I help you?" she asked with a tense smile. "I just wanted to surprise Carlos. Is he in his office?" Mariana replied casually. The receptionist hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but he's in a meeting." Mariana smiled and sat down in the waiting area. She knew Carlos wasn't in any meeting. She had tracked his location that morning and knew he was with Claudia at a nearby cafe. After waiting for a few minutes, she stood up and walked toward Carlos's office, ignoring the receptionist's protests. When she opened the door, she found exactly what she expected. The office was empty. She walked over to the desk and began searching through the papers. It didn't take long before she found something that made her stop. It was a prenuptial agreement she had never seen before. Mariana read it carefully, feeling the anger beginning to boil inside her. Carlos had prepared everything to make sure that, if they got divorced, she would get nothing. But what he didn't know was that this contract would have no validity against the evidence of abuse and embezzlement she had gathered. She put a copy of the document in her purse and left the office before anyone could stop her. As she drove back home, her mind was racing. This new discovery was another piece on the board, but it also confirmed that Carlos was more prepared than she had imagined. The final confrontation would be riskier than she had anticipated. When Carlos got home that night, Mariana was waiting for him in the living room with a serene expression that concealed everything she felt. "I went to your office today," she said, looking him straight in the eyes. Carlos stopped dead in his tracks, his expression changing from surprise to anger in an instant. "What were you doing there?" he asked, his tone loaded with irritation. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought maybe we could have lunch together. But they told me you were in a meeting, even though your office was empty." Carlos frowned, trying to come up with a quick excuse. "I was in a meeting outside the office." "I don't understand why you're so interested in what I do." Mariana held his gaze, challenging him with her calm. "I just wanted to do something nice for us, but it seems like that doesn't matter anymore." Carlos scoffed and sank into the couch. "Stop acting like this is a normal marriage. You know just as well as I do that this isn't working. Stop fooling yourself, Mariana." She didn't respond, but her silence was more eloquent than any words. She slowly stood up and left the room, leaving him alone with his frustration. In her bedroom, she opened the folder where she had stored the prenuptial agreement and added it to the file she was preparing. Carlos was wrong if he thought she was blind. She saw things more clearly than ever, and soon he would know. That night, Mariana lay beside Carlos, pretending to sleep while her mind kept working. She had come too far to stop now. The price of the truth would be high, but she was willing to pay it. Carlos still thought he had control, but the board was changing and Mariana was the one moving the pieces. Mariana prepared her move with the precision of a surgeon. She had been gathering evidence and weaving her strategy for weeks, but she knew the next step would require a little more subtlety. Carlos was more confident than ever, thinking he had reduced Mariana to an insignificant figure in his life. But she was far from being that shadow he thought he controlled. It was a peaceful morning when Mariana sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee in hand, waiting for Carlos to come down. She had planned every word she would say, every gesture she would use to disguise her true intention. When Carlos appeared, still with messy hair and his face marked by sleep, Mariana smiled at him kindly. "Carlos, I need to talk to you," she said softly, placing her cup on the table. He sat down across from her, raising an eyebrow with a bored expression. "What's going on now, Mariana? Another one of your useless complaints?" She ignored his tone and leaned slightly toward him. "I've been thinking. Maybe I need some time for myself. I feel like I've forgotten who I am, what I want. I think a trip would be good for me, something to clear my mind. Maybe when I come back, everything will be different." Carlos looked at her for a moment, evaluating her, as if trying to understand if what she was saying had any hidden meaning. Then he burst out laughing, leaning back in his chair. "Do you really think I care what you do?" he asked, laughing with disdain. "As far as I'm concerned, you can go to the ends of the earth. Better yet, go and stay there. That way, you'll leave me the space to be with Claudia, my real love." Carlos' words hit like a hammer, but Mariana didn't let him see it. She had anticipated exactly that response, and she was prepared to receive it. "I figured," she replied, forcing herself to keep a neutral tone. "But I thought at least you could pretend you cared." Carlos shook his head, still smiling. "Mariana, how many times do I have to tell you? There's nothing between you and me. All you do here is take up space. And if you leave, believe me, I won't miss you. Claudia gives me everything I need. You, well, you're nothing." Mariana looked away, pretending that Carlos' words hurt more than they really did. Inside, rage and determination mixed into a dangerous cocktail, but she knew how to control it. This moment was crucial, and she couldn't afford to fail. "Thanks for being honest, Carlos," she said finally, getting up from the table. "I'll be leaving in a few days. I hope you enjoy your time alone." Carlos didn't answer. He simply stood up, grabbed his phone, and left the room. Mariana watched him from the window as he got into his car and drove away. There was no trace of regret in his behavior, and that only fueled her determination. Mariana spent the rest of the day packing, although not for the trip she had told Carlos about. In reality, she had booked a room at a nearby hotel from where she could keep an eye on him without raising suspicion. She knew that with her out of the house, Carlos would feel free to act carelessly, giving her the perfect opportunity to gather more evidence. That night, as they ate in silence, Mariana observed him closely. Carlos seemed relaxed, even satisfied, as if his life plan was unfolding exactly as he wanted it. Mariana decided to break the silence. "I've booked my flight for this Friday," she said, avoiding looking directly at him. Carlos looked up from his plate, a mocking smile on his face. "Perfect. The sooner you leave, the better for me." "Have you told anyone else about your big getaway?" he asked, emphasizing the words with sarcasm. "Just Lucia. She's happy I'm taking some time for myself." Carlos nodded, clearly uninterested. Mariana felt a mix of frustration and satisfaction. She knew that every comment of hers only reinforced Carlos' confidence in his control of the situation, and that was exactly what she needed. Friday morning, Mariana left the house with a small suitcase and took a taxi to the hotel she had booked. From there, she set up her computer to access the cameras she had installed in the house, making sure Carlos had no idea he was being watched. It didn't take long for Carlos' true nature to come to light. That same night, Claudia arrived at the house with a bottle of wine and a dress that left little to the imagination. Mariana watched the scene from her screen, feeling her anger grow inside her. Carlos greeted her with a broad smile, hugging her as if she were the queen of his world. "Finally, we have the house to ourselves," Carlos said, leading her to the sofa. "No more Mariana lurking around like a ghost." Claudia laughed, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Do you think she's figured out that you'll never go back to her?" she asked, sitting next to him. Carlos shrugged. "I don't care what she thinks. The only thing that matters is that as long as she stays out of my way, everything will be perfect." Mariana closed her laptop and took a deep breath. She had come so far, and she knew the end was near. Carlos had no idea what was coming, and that gave her an advantage she wasn't willing to waste. As she lay on the bed in the hotel, she mentally reviewed her plan. She had gathered enough evidence to destroy him legally, financially, and socially. And although she knew the final confrontation would be difficult, she was ready to face it. Because in the end, it wouldn't be Carlos who would come out victorious. It would be her. Months had passed since Mariana left the house she had shared with Carlos. At first glance, it seemed like she was just taking some time for herself, a break from the life she had led for years. But in reality, she was building something much deeper, a new version of herself. Mariana settled into a small apartment near a park where she began walking every morning. At first, her steps were slow and painful, but over time, her body started to respond. The routine became her refuge. Every kilometer she covered was a victory, not just against her body, but against the words Carlos had left echoing in her mind. "You're a piñata. A fat thing filled with nothing." Those phrases became her fuel, not to prove something to him, but to prove to herself that she could be more, much more. The change wasn't immediate, but every day that passed was a step forward. Mariana joined a gym, a place she had avoided all her life for fear of being judged by others. At first, she felt out of place, but soon she found her rhythm. Zumba, yoga, weights, everything became part of her transformation, not just physically but emotionally. Her body began to change. The curves Carlos had despised became firm, her face regained its glow, and her eyes reflected something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. It wasn't just about her appearance. Mariana was learning to value herself in a way she had never known before. She also started to explore her intellect, enrolling in creative writing classes and starting a small online business that made her financially independent. Everything Carlos had tried to destroy was being reborn, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. The months of distance allowed Mariana to perfect her plan. From her computer, she monitored what was happening at the house. Carlos was still with Claudia, but things weren't as perfect as he imagined. Mariana watched how they argued, how Claudia demanded more than he could give. Carlos's expenses had increased significantly, and the joint accounts he thought he controlled were almost empty. Mariana had learned to divert small amounts to a secret account, making sure that, when the time came, she would have total control. One afternoon, while checking her email, she found an invitation to a wedding of a mutual friend with Carlos. It was the perfect opportunity to return. After all this time, she knew her presence would be a blow he would never expect. When the wedding day arrived, Mariana dressed in an elegant red dress that accentuated her transformed figure. Her hair, now long and shiny, cascaded over her shoulders. Her heels echoed loudly on the church floor as she walked toward her seat. The astonished looks came quickly. No one expected to see Mariana like this. Carlos was there, of course, with Claudia by his side. When he saw her, his jaw almost hit the floor. Claudia, on the other hand, frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Mariana was receiving. But Mariana didn't let herself be intimidated. She walked confidently to her seat, ignoring the stares and murmurs. She knew she had control. At the end of the ceremony, Carlos approached her. There was something in his expression that mixed disbelief and anger. "Mariana, you look different," he said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his surprise. She smiled calmly, as if she didn't notice the confusion on his face. "Thanks, Carlos. I've been taking care of myself." Carlos looked her up and down, as if trying to understand what had happened. But before he could say anything else, Claudia appeared, grabbing him by the arm. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" she said, trying to sound friendly, but jealousy filled her tone. Mariana extended her hand with a smile. "I don't think it's necessary. I'm Mariana, Carlos's wife." "Well, at least for now." The comment hit like a bomb. Carlos opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. Claudia, for her part, tried to keep her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. "Carlos and I need to talk, but don't worry, Claudia. I won't steal much of your time," Mariana added, looking directly at Carlos. Carlos had no choice but to follow her. He led her to a secluded corner of the hall, where he finally found his voice. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying to sound angry, but there was a note of nervousness in his voice. "I'm attending a friend's wedding, just like you," Mariana replied calmly. "Don't give me that. What do you want?" Mariana moved a little closer, reducing the distance between them. "I just wanted to remind you of something, Carlos. I'm no longer the woman you left behind. And when all this is over, when we finally face the consequences of your choices, I want you to know that there will be nothing you can do to stop me." Carlos took a step back as if Mariana's words had physically struck him. "You don't have anything on me," he said, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. Mariana looked him directly in the eyes, with a smile that wasn't mocking, but certain. "That's what you think." Without saying another word, Mariana turned and returned to the room, leaving Carlos alone, confused, and for the first time, afraid. He knew she had sparked something much bigger than him. And now, there was no turning back. Mariana was back in the city. Her return hadn't been discreet, and that was intentional. She had spent months in silence, planning, transforming, but now was the time to make noise. Every step she took was filled with a determination Carlos had never seen in her. This new version of Mariana wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, invincible. The impact of her appearance at the wedding had started to manifest. Carlos, always so confident in his control over everything, was now uneasy. Mariana knew this because she had received a message from him that morning. It was short, but revealing. "We need to talk now." Mariana didn't respond immediately. Instead, she spent the morning reviewing the final details of her plan. The file she had prepared against Carlos was ready, evidence of his embezzlement, compromising messages with Claudia, documents showing his attempts to strip her of any legal rights. Everything was perfectly organized. When she finally replied to Carlos's message, she did so with a simple sentence, "See you at home at 7." It was a calculated provocation. She knew Carlos hated feeling controlled, and by setting the time and place, she was marking her position of power. At 7 sharp, Mariana was sitting on the living room sofa, waiting. She had lit a couple of candles and poured 2 glasses of wine, not because she wanted to soften the atmosphere, but because she wanted to keep him off balance. When Carlos arrived, he seemed tense. He entered quickly, slamming the door harder than necessary. "What the hell are you doing, Mariana?" he asked immediately, not bothering to hide his irritation. Mariana raised her glass of wine and took a sip before responding. "I'm just making sure you get the message, Carlos." "What message?" he said, frowning as he sat down in front of her. Mariana placed the glass on the table and looked him directly in the eyes. "The message that this is over. You and me. But more importantly, the message that I won't walk away from this empty-handed." Carlos let out a dry laugh, but there was something nervous in his tone. "What are you talking about? Do you think you have any chance against me? You're nothing more than a scorned woman who couldn't keep me interested. You have nothing, Mariana. Nothing." She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculating. "Nothing? Let me show you something." Mariana stood up and took a thick folder out of her bag, placing it on the table. She opened it and began sliding documents toward Carlos, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, photos of him with Claudia, messages where he admitted his intention to manipulate their joint accounts to leave her with nothing. Carlos took the papers, initially with disdain, but his expression changed as he read them. The confidence that had always defined him began to crumble. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost strength. "Enough proof for a lawyer and a judge, Carlos. But there's more." Mariana took out her phone and played an audio recording where Carlos was talking to Claudia about his intention to get rid of Mariana cleanly, making sure she couldn't claim anything in the divorce. His voice echoed in the room, raw and cruel. Carlos jumped up, throwing the papers across the table. "You recorded our conversations?" he yelled, his face red with anger. Mariana remained calm, sitting there, looking at him as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. "Everything is documented, Carlos. Everything. And I have more copies, so don't try anything stupid. This isn't negotiable." Carlos was silent for a moment, breathing heavily. Finally, he sank into the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want, Mariana?" he asked, his voice lower, almost defeated. She watched him for a moment before responding. "I want a divorce. And I want what I'm entitled to. Nothing more, nothing less." Carlos looked at her in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe the woman standing in front of him was the same one he had belittled for so long. "And what if I say no?" he finally said, weakly attempting to regain some control. Mariana leaned toward him, her expression as hard as steel. "Then I'll take you to court. And believe me, Carlos, when all of this comes to light, you won't just lose your money. You'll lose your reputation, your job, everything. Do you want to risk that?" The silence that followed was heavy. Carlos knew he was cornered, and that angered him more than anything else. But he also knew Mariana was right. "How much do you want?" he asked, his tone bitter. "Half of everything," Mariana replied without hesitation. Carlos clenched his fists, but didn't say anything more. He knew he had lost. Mariana stood up, gathering her documents. "I'll give you a week to sign the papers. After that, it'll be a legal matter. You decide how you want this to end." Without waiting for a response, she headed toward the door. Before leaving, she paused and looked at him one last time. "By the way, Carlos, I hope you and Claudia are very happy. But don't be surprised if she finds someone else interesting when she realizes you're not as invincible as you thought." The door closed behind her, leaving Carlos alone, with the evidence of his defeat scattered across the table. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant not to have control, and the sensation terrified him. Carlos's world collapsed faster than he ever imagined. After Mariana filed for divorce and secured half of everything he had accumulated, he had no choice but to give in. But the financial loss was just the beginning. Mariana didn't just take assets and money, she took his reputation as well. With the evidence she had collected, she exposed him as an unfaithful and abusive man. The consequences didn't take long to arrive. Carlos lost his job, his most important friendships, and, worse yet, Claudia's admiration. Claudia had been a ghost ever since things started going wrong. For weeks, she barely responded to Carlos's messages, and their encounters, once filled with laughter and flirtation, had become cold and awkward. Until one day, in the small apartment Carlos had moved into after losing his house, Claudia finally showed up to confront him. "Claudia, I promise things will get better. I just need a little more time to recover," Carlos said, trying to sound confident as they sat in the tiny, messy living room. Claudia crossed her legs, looking at him with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Recover? How?" she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Carlos, have you looked at yourself? You have nothing. No job, no money, not even your house. What am I supposed to do with you?" Carlos tried to take her hand, but Claudia quickly pulled it away. "Claudia, don't leave me. You and we can start over. Just give me a chance." She laughed, but there was no joy in her laughter. "Start over? Carlos, let's be clear. I was with you because you gave me a comfortable life. Expensive restaurants, gifts, trips. Now you have nothing. What do you think I'm going to do with you? Live in this hole and support you while you try to rebuild your life? No, thanks. I'm not made for that." Carlos looked at her, stunned. He had lost everything for Claudia, and now she was leaving him without any mercy. "Were you with me for money?" he asked incredulously. Claudia stood up, smoothing her dress. "Carlos, darling, I was with you for the life you gave me. Now that you can't offer me that, you're no use to me. It's as simple as that." And with those words, Claudia left his life forever. Meanwhile, Mariana was living a transformation she never thought possible. She had taken control of her life in a way that had once seemed unattainable. With the money from the divorce, she opened a floral design business, something she had always dreamed of doing. The shop was tastefully decorated, and soon it became a success, attracting clients from all over the city. But Mariana's greatest achievement wasn't professional or financial. She had decided to adopt a baby, a 6-month-old girl who filled her life with indescribable joy. Little Valentina, with her big, curious eyes, became the center of her world. Mariana, who had been belittled for her inability to become a mother, was now proving that motherhood was not limited by other people's expectations. One day, while playing with Valentina in the garden of her new house, Mariana heard the sound of a car parking in front of the entrance. She looked toward the gate and saw Carlos. He looked worn out, his clothes wrinkled, and his hair disheveled. He was a very different man from the one he had once been. His arrogance had disappeared, replaced by obvious desperation. Mariana opened the door with Valentina in her arms, looking at him with no visible emotion. "What are you doing here, Carlos?" she asked, her tone calm. Carlos clasped his hands together as if pleading. "Mariana, please. I need to talk to you. Just give me a few minutes." She let him in but didn't invite him to sit down. She stood in front of him, with Valentina playing on her lap. "Mariana, I made a mistake. I was an idiot. I should never have treated you the way I did. I realized you were the best thing I had. Claudia left me, and now I'm completely alone. I need you. Please, give me a second chance." Mariana watched him in silence for a few seconds, letting his words hang in the air. "Now I'm the best thing you had?" she finally asked, her tone cold. "I used to be a punching bag, remember? An ugly whale. Now I'm your love, is that what you're saying?" Carlos knelt down, tears in his eyes. "Please, Mariana. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make it up to you. Just give me a chance." Mariana let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "He who laughs last, laughs best, Carlos. There's a God who sees everything, and I think you're finally getting what you deserve." He reached out to her, but Mariana took a step back, holding Valentina. "I don't need your apology. I don't have a place for you in my life anymore. I'm happy now, something you tried to take away from me for years. But what you didn't know is that I'm stronger than you ever thought." Carlos lowered his head, defeated. Mariana opened the door, signaling for him to leave. "Go, Carlos. This is the end for you and me. Learn to live with your decisions, just as I've learned to live with mine." Carlos left the house without saying another word. When he turned to look back, he saw Mariana closing the door with determination. It was the final chapter of a story he had tried to control, but one Mariana had finished writing in her own way. Inside her house, Mariana looked at Valentina, who was smiling, carefree about everything in the world. She knew she had made the right decisions. Life went on, and now it was hers, completely hers, to live it as she had always deserved. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to leave a comment sharing what you felt while listening to it. And if you've ever gone through a similar situation of betrayal, I'd love to hear your valuable opinion. I would be very honored if you left a like, shared the video with a friend or family member, and subscribed to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's appearing on your screen right now. We guarantee entertainment exclusively for you. See you in the next video.